The morning of August 8th was pretty normal. A sunny day outside, isolated showers, and high winds because of the impending Hurricane Dora, which was already making her way to the Hawaiian Islands. Things started off that morning pretty casual. Nothing too bad was happening.
The day of the fire was it was crazy. Woke up early. I was supposed to be on set over on the other side of the island, area called Haiku, which is typically a very windy spot just in general. The day we knew there was this hurricane that was off the coast of Maui, we knew that we're going to have high winds. It was very windy here in Lahaina, which when it gets windy in Lahaina, it just feels different because it doesn't typically get like that. Lahaina is the merciless sun. It's a very hot, dry area. I didn't want to go to the other side because the winds were so high and it was scary. There was already a fire that had started up on the hillside, and actually a couple of my daughter's friends had come down and evacuated from there to come down and stay with us. This was already by 7:30 in the morning. There was just a few things on set on the day that I felt I needed to be there, and for the cast, for the crew, I felt like I needed to be there. Typically, when you leave from the west side of Maui to the other sides of the Maui, you know that there's one lane going in and out, and you know that with high winds or bad weather, there's a good chance you're going to get stuck on the other side of the island. I actually brought a pillow and had a change of clothes because you just know you're going to sleep on the road for a little while, right? What we didn't realize was obviously the extent of what was going to happen that day.
So it really did start off as a normal morning. There was an expectation that something was coming as far as the hurricane, but no one suspected a wildfire. Everyone was surprised when it happened. A resident named Shane True was interviewed by the New York Times, and he told them he initially called the police because there was a fire. A power line had fallen and there was a loud pop, causing him to call 911 immediately. And they showed up along with the fire department about 6 minutes later. Then county officials said everything was fine, nothing to see here, the fire is 100% contained. But it was not. Because when Shane True came back after going to run errands, that's when he saw it again. The fire had returned. "Oh my God, pack up the dogs, there's a fire there," shouted a neighbor. It was like a freight train coming down the mountain. When I turned around, it was right there. That's how fast it was. I literally ran down the stairs, grabbed the cats and dogs, and backed up to drive through black smoke, fire, heat, just flying. Although Shane was able to flee his home, he, like many others, were stuck on the road that day. In our interview with Jonathan for The Jeremiah Patterson Show, he told us that he deeply regrets putting work over family that day and was living in a state of horror and emotion in his desperate attempt to get back to them.
Weighs heavy, because we have responsibilities to our work and to our friends and to our people. Again, talk about Ohana. We look at everybody the same. At the same time, when I got stuck on the other side, and when I talked to my wife and the fire was getting worse, the winds were getting worse, roofs were blowing off of some buildings, the fire flared back up, it was coming in, smoke was getting the area. My wife was telling me this through text and through phone call, and you could tell by the speed of my conversation, but there was panic from both sides. I can tell the tone of her text, I can tell the tone of her conversation. And I knew instantly we had to try to get back to the side, myself and a couple others on the crew and cast who lived here. And we didn't get back in time. We got stopped on the highway. I did end up sleeping on the highway like I expected, but for a much worse reason than I would have thought.
Jonathan wasn't able to reach his family until 3 whole days later. Communication was down. If you did get the chance to place a text, it was maybe one and it barely went through. Everything was silent. It was impossible to get a hold of anyone. So when Jonathan received the text that his wife and his kids were okay, that they were safe after being uncertain for 3 whole days, he became overwhelmed with emotion.
From that moment on, there was no getting in. The next day or so there was getting out, but my wife and kids left on foot from Lahaina. They like a lot of people, they just tried to find any way they could get out. They felt if they got in a car, it would have been too late to get in a car. They would have been stuck on the road with the fire around them. They left on foot. They ended up getting to a evacuation center. The evacuation center got evacuated because the fire kept going. And they ended up at a friend's house, and the friends knew the power was out. They knew there was a fire. They had no idea that Lahaina was gone. For my wife and kids to try to explain that to them just wasn't making sense, because it doesn't make sense how much was really gone. Communication was gone with them. The cell phones weren't working for several days. There were little blips of texts that would come through, and the first text that I got was the morning after, so this would have been probably, let's say, 18 hours after I got stopped at my entrance back to Lahaina. And I got a text from a friend, and I didn't have his number actually in my phone, and it just said, "This is Mark, I have your wife and your kids." Bawled. Absolutely bawled, just cried. Gonna cry again. But there, even then, they had no way to get back to me. I had no way to get to them. We finally found out about a day and a half later that our house was still up, our cars were still in the driveway. It took them another day to get a ride into the area to get the keys and to see if they could drive through the whole mess. It took them about a day to get a ride into town, drop them off, a couple blocks away because it was blocked off by the National Guard. They convinced the National Guard to let us go in. If you let them go in, they went in, got the keys, they were able to drive out, and then they met up with me. So yeah, about 2.5 days later, I think is really what it was.
I mean, going through something like that really impresses upon you the need to be prepared. Once I came to the realization that I was going to need to try to fill my car with everything I needed to kind of like start over from scratch again. I don't know how to really kind of describe that, because I felt the urgency of the moment in that, I needed to take action so that I could continue my life. But it was just sort of like a moment of zen. It was really strange to describe. I mean, I've read stories and I've heard of accounts of people who have been in like survival situations where you literally you come to terms with the fact of a hard fact, and then you fully invest your mind and you focus on what it is you have to do. So I was able to fly a drone and sort of see how fast the flames were coming, but I knew enough to know not to underestimate how fast a 60 or a 70 mile an hour wind can move a fire.
The wildfires that engulfed and vaporized Lahaina and Maui were not widely known about. The general public did not know this was coming until it reached their front doors. But what's even more enraging, and something that we've been following and investigating here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show for a year now, is why. Why the state government failed to alert Hawaiians. Why did the emergency systems fail? And no sirens were sounded, no alerts were sent out, and no warnings were issued. Why was everyone left completely in the dark? What did the government know, and when? And this is part of why I wanted to do this exclusive report here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show. And we here have just started now getting to the bottom of certain things, piecing together the puzzles that are now starting to add up, and getting exclusive information about current talks in regard to emergency reform. So the evacuation efforts were unbelievably bad when it came to getting out. It was absolutely deadly and apocalyptic, straight out of a movie, causing many to resort to the unimaginable. Cars with full gas tanks that reached the fire exploded. Hotels, restaurants, and businesses were destroyed. Screams of horror as people had to jump out of their vehicles into the ocean that was also burning hot from the fire. Some families were completely helpless and burned alive in their cars.
It's completely stuck and people are going to die here if you don't make sure that that intersection is going to flow.
One of our reporters at our news organization found that he had 3 family members that were in a car, and they couldn't get out, and they were surrounded by the flames. And that's where they spent their last moments.
I do not know, but we are caught in massive traffic and we're covered in ashes and embers, and there's a lot of people honking and trying to get out of the road. If there's anything you guys could do, because the ashes are engulfing our car and like the flames are going on our car.
Okay, I'm sorry. We have the fire department and the officers on their way to that area.
The hydrants started to run dry.
It was a real low point for me because I knew that we had lost, that we were this was going to be worse than we could imagine.
Many people were stuck in a long line of cars, others abandoned their vehicles as the fire got too close, and many died trapped inside their vehicles as the flames became so intense and so ferocious that it became just absolutely unimaginable, engulfing their entire vehicle and everyone else inside of it. But per our investigation and deeper analysis, we found out the horrific truth of why those cars weren't moving, what was taking so long, and the infuriation in residents' voices on the phone to 911, desperately begging for help, desperately begging for traffic to move along or they would die. This was put together with existing public civilian camera recordings and interviews. A consistent theme in the Hawaii wildfire story is the evacuation mess. If you are trying to get out by car, you're either stuck or driving fiercely through flames. What we found here at the Jeremiah Patterson Show by listening to 911 calls, interviews, reading articles, and watching videos is that in most cases, major exits were blocked, and emergency operators were not at all helpful.
Hello? Hello?
Bank of Hawaii is on fire.
Lahaina is totally busy right now. You have to be patient. If you're safe, number one is if you're safe, please stay there. If you are not safe, you gotta find some way to get to the ocean.
Shit, because they're like surrounded by fires and they can't even like dig out. How are you gonna get them out?
I'm not sure, sir. We're working on it. We only have so much resources. They're getting as much as they can.
Wow, that's fucked up. Okay. Oh, you guys just gonna try your best for try to get them out or something?
Yeah, we're trying our best to evacuate that whole area. That whole entire area. They're definitely working on it. We have every single resource we have out there right now.
Okay. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
So in that emergency call with this 911 operator, she is heard essentially being frustrated talking to someone while they're supposed to be helping them about getting out. She also is talking to someone who's stuck in traffic. And what you hear is a lot of, we're trying to get someone over there. We're doing the best we can. You're going to have to find a way to get out or jump into the ocean. I mean, this was literally the 911 emergency response team during the crisis that ensued Lahaina and Maui. And it was that same system that ended up failing. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But first, I want to put my finger on something that we've been following very, very closely. Something that sort of has not made sense for us. It has been very inexplicable. And that is the evacuation exits. This is a map of the fires ensuing the Lahaina area. They were already trapped by the fires and trying to find another way out. But what made it worse is those exits were blocked by police officers. The question is, Why?
When he was later heading home through Lahaina town just before 3 p.m., he hit this roadblock on the southbound highway at Kapuna Kea before the Cannery Mall. Herzog backtracked to where Front Street meets the highway. Traffic moved well enough at that time to rejoin the highway near Lahaina Luna here at 3:02 p.m. But then, Herzog says traffic snarled with downed trees and crews working to the south.
Then I ended up turning around and trying to go north again, thinking, well, at least I'll get out of Lahaina.
But to the north, the gridlock was worse, he says, so he detoured over on Baker and then south again on Waine'e. At 3:19, his camera shows a police vehicle blocking access to the highway at Papalaua.
So I went around back to Front Street, and all the cars were lined up, but none of them were moving. And I walked all the way from Safeway to the Chart House. Not one car had moved. And I was wondering what was stopping the traffic. And I got to the end and I looked up. There were no obstructions. There was no reason to keep those cars. And I said, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm under orders to keep them here. And I said, the fire is right around Safeway. It's going to hit Front Street. You know, these people got to get out of here. And he said, I'm following orders.
No way.
And so I just kept walking. Well, maybe he knows something I don't, you know. So, and I keep walking down the highway. And I look behind, no cars are coming out, still no cars coming out, and I started hearing boom, boom, boom.
So these suspicion and questions are there. If police officers were given orders to essentially sit there, to halt anything that they were doing in terms of evacuation, in terms of getting people away from the fires, if they were given those orders, who were they given those orders by? And who would give such inexplicable orders as cars were already essentially being burned as the fire was engulfing and coming closer and closer and closer? Why were those exits shut down for 2 hours? Also, why were those exits shut down for such a long time, especially if in front of those exits, there was no explicable danger. There was no conceivable object that potentially could obstruct the evacuation efforts to get people out of Maui and out of Lahaina away from the fire. Why was the evacuation to get out of Lahaina and Maui obstructed so bad that people ended up jumping into the ocean, fleeing their vehicles for their lives because police vehicles were stopping people from getting out? I mean, it is inexplicable. It boggles my mind. It is infuriating. I can imagine the enragement of how people feel in Maui and Lahaina. But when police are asked about this is their response.
Have a listen to what the police chief said when I asked him about road closures and whether we would get more information about how fire and the police department were communicating on that day.
We want to get people out. And so let me answer it like this. There is going to be a very detailed long after action. It might be the longest after action that's ever been. Every data point is going to be scrubbed and looked at and meticulously gone through. We're actively trying to recover people. It's our community. It's our people too. And so I say that is, let us right now do what we need to do and let the after action do what it needs to do. But I can tell you that we did everything we can to make sure that we preserve life and protect each other. And so we've already found that some of the false reports on the direction of travel were not correct. We were getting people out of the area. We were forcing people not to go at a certain point down Front Street because it had already gotten too late. And so the efforts were to get people away from the fire and away from the danger.
So they weren't directed down Keane?
They were not directed toward the danger.
I can tell you, and I agree with the chief, I'm happy to answer all these questions when the right time comes, which is when the after action and investigation comes about, what we knew when we knew it.
So the last person you heard there was the mayor of Maui, and he has been facing increasing calls not only to resign, but essentially just to give us answers on what exactly is going on, because he was the one that made the decision not to turn on the sirens. So the police officer here, whoever he is, he's sort of giving this non-answer about why the roads were blocked. And yes, we did actually help people get out, but that is not the wide consensus of the general public, especially those who were there. Their consensus, and per videography, is that those exits were blocked. Those exits were completely inaccessible because of police vehicles blocking them when there was no obstruction that would have prevented those cars from safely getting out. So if we just step back for a second here and assess the emergency response, one, no one got any type of alert. No siren sounded, nothing. Two, because of that, people thought, this couple essentially was getting ready to go out on vacation. According to the New York Times, they're like, oh, you're leaving? All right, bye. They didn't even know that there was a fire going on. And so, I mean, the systems failed on a massive level. It was life and death threatening, and they did not sound. It was radio silence as these fires were rapidly approaching, to everyone's surprise. No one was told to evacuate. When they saw the wildfire, that's when they found out that there was a fire. They were not told anything. When they found out and finally did try to get out, there was nowhere to go. Many people were trapped. This was the result of many cars in Maui and Lahaina just the next day. Gone. Melted metal. For some of the people there, they were only given 3 options to escape. 1, you can either be burned alive in your car while sitting in endless traffic as a swirl of leaves and powerful winds surrounds you. 2, jump into heat-intensified oceans, into a hell-intensified ocean where the fire has already engulfed most of it and people are trying not to get burned alive after having that be their only other contention, because the fire had spread so large and so fast that there was nowhere else to go. Or 3, find a way to get out yourself. Yes, the exits are blocked, but find a way to get out yourself. I don't know, maybe you can fly out your car. I mean, as the fire became more prevalent in the town, the crisis was exacerbated by a multitude of other issues. Fire hydrants became dry as the entire community water system collapsed. I mean, just in terms of understanding how bad that is, this is a map of Lahaina's water system, per the Attorney General's investigation report. You can see where they sit and how each one has a portal that distributes back for the people. For that to fail for days and even longer is absolutely detrimental. Absolutely detrimental. And you could even hear that being described in the 911 calls. Power lines also went down, firefighters were overwhelmed. Lahaina's 911 system ended up crashing completely after an intake of so many calls. How in the world does that happen? And as infuriating and mind-boggling as that is, a very striking and unsettling but recurring theme in the story that we are continuing persistently beating the drum on because it's so inexplicable and it's so enraging that we don't understand is why the sirens did not sound. Why was no one ever alerted? Because per our investigation and research on the Jeremiah Patterson show, it was clear well in advance that something was coming, and city officials knew that. You had time to prepare, you knew this was coming. What happened? Hawaii's emergency management system failing is a common theme. This happened before back in 2018 in a really, really bad way. They all thought they were going to die. Because at 8:07 in the morning on Saturday, everyone's phone went off with a message that immediately caused wide-scale panic. This was the message in all caps, quote, "Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill." End quote. For 38 minutes, the entire island of Hawaii went into a frenzy and everyone thought they were going to die.
This is not a drill.
The alert that sent a wave of fear across Hawaii was sent by an employee who thought the threat was real. Warning of an incoming ballistic missile, the message triggered panic.
A missile may impact on land or sea within minutes.
The false alarm came from this civil defense bunker on January 13th, 8:05 a.m., a routine drill by the overnight shift. A phone recording starts, exercise, 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 but includes, "This is not a drill." 8:07 a.m., a day shift worker, fearing a real missile attack, warns the public from a computer. Then a drop-down menu asks, "Are you sure you want to send this alert?" He clicks yes. Tonight, that employee has been fired.
He has performance issues, and throughout the 10 years, he has confused drills at least 2 times.
It takes 38 minutes to issue a new alert. No threat.
This is the state warning point.
Tonight, Vern Miyagi, the Emergency Management Agency Administrator, has resigned, taking full responsibility. The FCC saying the state didn't have reasonable safeguards in place and didn't have a plan for what to do if a false alert was transmitted.
That was 2018, 6 years ago. That was reporting from NBC News at the time. After that disaster in the system, there was wide-scale investigations. The official who inadvertently sounded this alarm was fired, and Congress got involved. There were congressional hearings by the House Energy and Commerce Committee. It was seen as a complete failure of leadership. They were grilled. This failure of the system came at a time when the FCC was planning to update the country's wireless emergency alert system. There was a vote in Hawaii to overhaul the wireless emergency alert system because of that cataclysmic failure, and things were reviewed, systems were looked, and a new emergency guidance was put in multiple reports. But the question lies, after all of that preparation to get things right the next time, so people wouldn't think that a potential missile was coming to denigrate the entire Hawaiian Islands, after all of that preparedness and training and review, how does that system fail again, and once again on a massive level that cost lives? For years, wildfire experts and residents of Maui warned that something big was coming. Dried vegetation, a wildfire, yes, because of course that would inevitably cause that to happen. Climate change as a result of dried vegetation. It's common. You know, wildfires are common in Hawaii. It was clear that something was coming in regard to something being huge and destructive. It'll ravage untamed and unperturbed by anything. This is what wildfire experts were telling them. And the state agreed with that sentiment. They published 2 reports on wildfire preparedness. They were in full anticipation and expectation of major wildfire event in the state that would be life-changing. Yet when 2023 came around, they completely bungled it. They diametrically screw up the response and emergency plans. In addition to the state's systems failing, cell phone sites were burned. We spoke exclusively here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show you saw earlier with executive producer and co-creator of the Hawaiian hit comedy TV show Moku Moku, Jonathan Melakidze. And he tells us that it was very hard to just get text to go through. In addition to that, he was also stuck on the road. There were very, very much impediments in terms of traffic being the main one. 2 major roads, that were essentially effective escape routes were closed because the flames had caused the power lines to fall, which blocked exiting. The New York Times said, quote, "Powerful emergency sirens never made a sound. Fire hoses almost ran dry." For those affected by the wildfires and lost everything, there is anger towards the state government, but also questions to how the system failed and who was in charge. And what we're learning about the mismanagement and mishandling of this crisis is mind-boggling. It is preposterous. This was the headline at Hawaii News Now, quote, "As Maui burned, Hawaii's top emergency management officials were at a Waikiki conference," end quote. Apparently, they were being educated on how to respond to a crisis of this magnitude instead of actually fighting the fire. Gina Lawless, who lost her home, said, quote, "So many people I know say that we never knew anything about the fire." The mayor of Maui said he doesn't know who was in charge, which is diametrically inconceivable given that you're the head chief of the city and you don't know who was in charge at the emergency management center. I guess that's not a problem anymore because the guy just resigned, citing health reasons, which we all know isn't the actual case. Former Maui Emergency Management Administrator Herman Andaya was still in charge. He just wasn't present. He was in contact with his team, I guess by phone. I don't know exactly how, end quote. Are we serious? Are we serious here? There were reports that there was a fire coming to Maui. and the emergency management administrator is talking to his team by phone. Dude, aren't you supposed to be at the facility communicating in person? I mean, this is not the time to take a vacation or to take a leisure or to take a break if you know that something huge with widespread, lethal, catastrophic, cataclysmic consequences of huge proportions could impact people's lives, could impact islands. I mean, take a look at that map again of Lahaina. All of those burn marks, all of those burn marks were where the fire spread. That is absolutely inconceivable. And the emergency management administrator, I'm sorry, he wasn't physically at the site. He was, contacting his team by phone. But given the fallout that this situation has prompted calls for the mayor of Maui to resign. But, he's like, oops, I didn't turn on the siren, but I also don't regret not turning on the siren as well, because, that would have caused panic. We don't want that.
The quote heard round the world today.
Do you regret not sounding the sirens?
I do not. And the reason why...
So many people said they could have been saved if they had time to escape. Had a siren gone off, they would have known that there was a crisis emerging. And as we know, so many bodies were found in the ground.
Do you want him to give you the answer, or do you want to give? Well, then let him finish his answer.
Sorry, there's a lot of people.
Well, you're talking and you're not letting him talk. If you want to talk, come up here.
I'm ready for the answer.
Then wait.
So can we please get an explanation on how that makes logical sense? We didn't turn on the sirens because people were going to go crazy. Okay, so if there's a tornado coming to, let's say, I don't know, Houston, or a hurricane coming towards Houston, let's not send out alerts. Let's not send out emergency texts, or let's not get people, on the news to talk about the hurricane that's coming to Texas, that's coming to Houston. Because we don't want to freak people out, of course, right? That's going to cause widespread panic. People are going to evacuate. Everyone's going to scream, hurricane's coming. I mean, it makes no logical sense to say something as grotesque and as asinine and as fundamentally stupid as that. We didn't send out the alerts. We didn't turn on the sirens because people were going to go crazy. Goodness. I mean, the response team here. In emergency situations, emergency sirens are meant to be turned on to alert people in the event of a disaster. Not turning them on, and deliberately so, is not only an abdication of leadership, but an egregious act that unequivocally could have conceivably caused increased loss of life. Not turning them on because you don't want to freak people out is incredulously nefarious. It is stupid. It's dumb. It doesn't make sense. Not even on its face. I mean, if the sirens had been sounded, more people could have been evacuated and gotten out in time, instead of being faced with burning alive or jumping in the water. According to one resident, he never heard law enforcement on loudspeakers urging people to evacuate, but once the fire got worse, he said it was already too late. It was already too late. How many times have we heard that? How many times have we heard that? In addition to multiple failures in the system, there also, of course, was the water systems running dry and firefighters having to contend with that grave, grave reality.
The county's Department of Water Supply told us the fire caused more than 2,000 pipe breaks, bleeding water out of the system.
It was somewhere around there that I heard that where my mom's office is, which is a long ways away from where I was, it was on fire. And then to know that it was there and to know that I was running out of water, I was like, man, it's over. Like, we're gonna keep trying, but it's over.
This was the view from inside a fire truck. Black skies lit by an inferno that stretched for blocks. Firefighters didn't have the water or the crews to stop it.
What was the decision-making process not to de-energize or turn the power off on these lines during that critical period?
So in 2019, our teams, understanding what happened in...
And I appreciate the history. What I'm trying to figure out is on that morning, what was your strategy? And were there people who were awake all night monitoring this storm to see what we could do? What's going on? Tell us and the American people what was going on that morning and why you didn't de-energize earlier.
Absolutely. I'm trying to explain to you why we didn't.
Well, I understand you're going through the process. I'm trying to figure out what happened that day, back in August.
So when you're asking why didn't we shut off the power, that is not our protocol.
The damage done to Lahaina and Maui will take decades to rebuild, costing $5.5 billion, more than 2,000 buildings destroyed, more than 100 dead. Lahaina and Maui overnight going from this to this. Beauty and enriched historical paradise to ashes and a smoke-filled atmosphere. For the 1-year anniversary of the fires, I wanted to put together a look at now, what has changed in 2024. Many are still living in temporary housing and hotels. Assistance from FEMA is very slow. In a new investigative piece by Nick Grube at Honolulu Civil Beat, co-published with ProPublica, there's groundbreaking reporting on how landlords are raising the rent as much as $8,000. And insurance companies are jumping at any chance of money they can get.
You know, it's kind of funny. I feel like we've been in some form of triage ever since and still are. You know, we are just moved back into our house just before a year to the day that everybody evacuated. And the house is still, you know, it has a lot of work to do still. There's a lot of cleanup, and it's weird because we're putting back to the pieces. You know, everything's kind of going back together, so it seems like it's all in the positive direction. It is still in a positive direction, but it's so weird because there's so much minutia underneath the moving forward that makes us feel like we're still living somewhere in that first day, the day of the event. You know, one of the examples is, and you know, this is, I guess, the system and the way it works, but you know, insurance never paid us the money to properly rebuild and clean our house properly. Our house was full of ash. Our house had, you know, the fence was burned down, and you know, we actually found a singed stuffed animal in the middle of our attic. We were right there in the fire, and it's a miracle that our house didn't burn down. But that being said, we had to basically redo the house from head to toe, and I had to stop working full time to be able to do the work on my own, since the insurance money didn't give us the money to hire people. And the crazy thing is, we're in a position that a lot of other people aren't in. We have credit cards that we can at least put stuff on for the time being until hopefully we do get paid properly and cover our costs. There are a lot of people out here who don't even have that. There are friends of mine I know that they're living with just cleaning as best they can and hoping that their house is safe to live in. You know, it's all of that goes through our minds, and it's part of our conversation every single day ever since the fire. And to constantly have that weight of still some forms of uncertainty in our heads, and then not to mention there are people who have it far worse than us, people who aren't going to have a home for 2 years, 5 years, who knows what. It's just I don't know, it's hard to fathom any clean resolution and a day where we can sit there and say, oh, I went through the whole day today and I didn't even think about where we're at and where we're going and what our next move is.
What have you seen around the state in terms of just recently, like day-to-day life? Like, how have things been in Hawaii since the wildfires? Have things been in, like, I guess, proactive in terms of change, or still in working progress?
Still very much a work in progress. The one thing that I would say
we've seen since even like before the fires happened, because Hawaii is a state where we live aloha. I mean, we when we say aloha to someone, we actually mean more than just hello or goodbye. How are you doing? You know, is there something that I can do for you? I mean, like there's a genuine concern that people have for one another that just kicked into overdrive here. There's definitely a work in progress. The affordable housing issue has always been a problem, and the state of Hawaii has been dealing with this love-hate relationship with tourism. There are a lot of people from the mainland that come and they buy homes, and that drives up the property value more than what working people can afford. There has to be an answer for that, and there is a disproportion between people who have a lot of money, who can afford these like mega mansions that are here, and people who have 5 jobs, and both parents are working themselves to the bones and don't have the money to put their kids through school. So yeah, very much a work in progress for sure. Very much.
As there are a multitude of active investigations still going on, in addition to litigation that we're seeing, a $4 billion settlement was just reached for the victims of the Maui wildfires. I remember seeing that news and initially thinking it was a really good thing in terms of the path to recovery. But Hawaii News Now did sort of like a report that although this may be good, residents are saying that this essentially could, cover up some accountability in terms of the victims' efforts to seek justice and answers. What do you make of that observation?
I find that to be accurate. I think that the news of a settlement is a great thing, yet and still, how fast does that $4 billion get disseminated to those who need it? Because last time I checked, every single day there are probably more than I would wager a guess that there are probably more than 10 or 15 families per week that are forced to leave. So and then after people leave, if they get like whatever that settlement is going to be, is that money enough to bring them back and then to also make them whole with a home? That would be an interesting sort of like report and investigation to kind of like get behind. I think that the local population understand that to make Front Street whole, I mean that area of West Maui that was vaporized, that's going to be probably more than about 10 years in the making to actually rebuild what was there, because that wasn't only some residences. Those were businesses that had been open for well over 35, 40 years, even longer than that, and accounted for such a large part of the state's economy. I would wager a guess that, there was a statistic that came out maybe 6 months after the fires that, Maui itself loses more than $16 million a day because of the loss of Front Street. So again, kind of like circling back to your original question, I would love to see how fast that money can actually go out to the people who need it, because FEMA and United Way and all of these other sort of like big wig kind of organizations that come in to help. I understand the need for paperwork, but that needs to be expedited a lot quicker.
Yeah. And that's definitely one of the reasons and the cause for frustration, especially with the fact that people are leaving their homes. There was recently a report in The Guardian about people having to move and relocate to Las Vegas because of the slow recovery efforts, or not necessarily getting that money fast enough. You use the word vaporize, which is definitely very, very much on point. I wanted to ask, as someone who's on the ground and, physically looking at the layout, how does Maui look today?
Yeah. I would say, I mean, like if you're talking about the west side in particular, obviously that landscape is forever changed.
So people in the mainland, for many other reasons, whether it's wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, there are natural disasters all over the place, and it's happening all over the U.S. right now still. So I know that we're not the only ones going through trauma and difficulties and a hard time. I met a gentleman who works for the EPA who was out here, and he was really, part of the recovery program and looking at what it's going to take to rebuild, how much time it's going to take to rebuild, checking the infrastructure of what's left. And I asked him, I said, what's the difference? Because you've been all around the U.S. for a bunch of different disasters. What's the biggest difference for you in Maui compared to the other locations you've been to? And he simply said, logistics. You can't drive a truck in, you can't drive a truck out. Getting the pieces and the parts to rebuild is going to take longer and cost a lot more. The time to do it is just, it's exponentially more than it is anywhere else in the U.S. And when you look at how long it's taken to, New Orleans from Katrina still has issues and problems in places that aren't rebuilt. It's like that across the place. If you can't do that on the mainland and get it rebuilt, how easy are we going to be able to rebuild Lahaina that scorched so many buildings, so many properties? I think it says something like 2,200 businesses and houses.
That was just an absolutely emotional reality for the people who are living in Lahaina and Maui. The fact that the reconstruction time is going to effectively take years and years to rebuild. A great point by Jonathan there. If it's hard to rebuild on the mainland from New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina from 2005, how in the world are we going to work on Lahaina and Maui after the fires happened in 2023? Just a devastating reality for the people who live there.
It's a lot. I think for me, my biggest thought and idea is, I've lived here for 23 years. It's a long time. I have no input on what should happen to Lahaina. I've been here for 23 years. There are families and generations who have been here for a long time. Lahaina belongs to them, and what happens to Lahaina belongs to them, in my opinion. Obviously, there's municipalities and infrastructures and all that will go through all the proper protocol. But so far as what Lahaina looks like and what it should be, I think really needs to go back to the people from Lahaina. So I work, I tend bar as well, and I tend bar at resorts, I tend bar at a busy restaurant. I meet people who are on vacation here all the time. I've met them before, through COVID, before, after the fire, all this. The people who are responsible, the people who are visiting in a responsible way, understand that there's an emotional connection to the island that the people have here that a lot of people don't have in their own hometowns. The land of Maui is scarred from the fire, and the land to a lot of people out here is part of them personally. And I live right at the entrance of the fire. I see tourists driving right by my house every day, going up to the checkpoints, asking if they get in, trying to get pictures and videos. They stop on the highway to take videos of the burn zone. The term clout jacking came into my eardrums a while back. Don't come out here and seek out spots that you can take pictures of, videos of, and try to tell a story for a place that you're not even from just to get social media likes and clicks and clout. That's not your disaster to showcase. It's not your disaster to tell a story about. And especially if you're visiting out here and saying, oh, woe is me, Lahaina isn't here, I can't go to my favorite restaurant. Well, guess what? There are people who lost their jobs at that favorite restaurant. There are residents who can't go to their favorite restaurants as well. You on your vacation have a million other places to go check out while you're here in Maui. Go to those locations. Go to the places that are still here. Support the economy. Support the people who are working hard to still try to survive while they find homes, while they try to find an income again, while they fight with rising housing costs and a vast shortage of housing. Just be aware and be conscious of, read the room, right? Read the room. Don't pry into people's business. If you're talking to somebody and they want to bring it up, let them bring it up. That's fine. Listen. If they're bringing it up, feel free to ask inquisitive, honest questions. But don't just start asking people around, what was it like? Where were you? What did you do? If they don't want to talk about it, it's still very hard for a lot of people to talk about it. Don't ask them. I think that's kind of the main thing. Respectful tourism is tourism coming out, staying away from the areas that are still impacted. Let that area keep healing. There's a ton of construction going on. There are a ton of people working in the area. There are a ton of people trying to figure out whether or not they're going to get their house back next year, in 2 years, in 5 years, ever. So just let them have that. I just have a lot of opinions, but for the most part, I will say this, for the most part, I've met so many people out here who are traveling and visiting respectfully. I have a lot of people who've come out here year after year who've asked me personally, we're coming out, how can we help? What can we do? I know people who've come and they donated their time when we had distribution centers to help people who didn't have enough food or enough resources. They spent a day or two of their vacation time helping the community. And I'm not saying that you have to spend your vacation time helping the community, but that's respectful tourism. What isn't respectful tourism is coming out and trying to get into the areas that people are saying you can't go, you shouldn't go, and then getting upset that you can't do that. This isn't your place to get upset about. I wouldn't walk into your backyard if you're going through a disaster and start filming around just to show everybody else what your disaster looks like.
Mr. Jonathan Milikidze telling the Jeremiah Patterson show, essentially that the tourism efforts by many people have been proven effectively to be quite rude, especially as Maui and Lahaina are recovering from an unimaginable, life-altering, cataclysmic disaster. And this is something that I've covered here on the Jeremiah Patterson show very much so in sort of a respectful way because of the crisis of what's happened there. But for people who tend to essentially seek Hawaii as a vacation spot, but not to seek them as a vacation spot for effectively, just the tropicals, you could say, but to seek it as a spot, as he used the term clout jacking, or to get famous or to get likes and follows on social media. You're exploiting their tragedy for your own social gain. What does that say about you? Be respectful here. They have just gone through a life-altering disaster that has taken many of their families, if not their families, someone they know, a friend's family as well. They are hurting, they are recovering, they are healing. Now is not the time to go and to have a hoo-wah vacation and let's have fun. Let's go take pictures of the burn sites. I mean, come on, people. Hawaii is in the state of recovering. They are in the state of still many questions unanswered as the strive for accountability continues, and just insane stuff like this. I mean, Nick Grube reporting at Honolulu Civil Beat about rent prices being increased all the way up to $8,000 is just completely unfathomable. But this is something that is happening. It's a very live and present reality.
My name is Peter Sunday. Our landlord's son wanted to rent his home out to FEMA for $8,000 a month. So they kicked us out of our house so he could move into our home, my wife and my 2 children and I.
Apocalyptic images from Hawaii.
Devastation and heartbreak.
This is now the deadliest wildfire in modern U.S. history.
A year ago, wildfires burned across Maui, killing more than 100 people in Lahaina, destroying thousands of structures and displacing nearly 13,000 residents. Immediately after the fires, Hawaii Governor Josh Green and his lieutenant governor issued a series of emergency proclamations aimed at preventing most evictions on the island. But there were exceptions to that proclamation that still allowed landlords to evict their tenants in certain circumstances. That included situations in which a landlord themselves wanted to move into a property, or they had an immediate family member that planned to move in.
They used the tactic of getting around the proclamation that said you couldn't evict long-term tenants to house a FEMA family.
Maui already had some of the highest rents in the country before the fires. Afterward, the median rent on Maui rose by 44%, according to a recent estimate. Emergency housing programs, including one run by FEMA, started paying landlords upwards of 2 times the going rate for a long-term rental. In some cases, this meant that landlords were getting paid $8,000 a month for a 2-bedroom house. Tenants' rights groups said that these rates incentivized landlords to start kicking people out.
Now that we've been evicted, it's almost impossible to find someone that'll rent to you.
During an eviction hearing, Sunday told the judge that he didn't think that it was fair that he and his family were being kicked out of their home so that his landlord's son could move in. Here's what the judge said in response.
There's nothing I can do about that. That is what the law allows. So that needs to be taken on with the governor, our mayor, or legislature, because there are people who very likely take advantage of that.
Just 4 days after the Sundays were evicted, Governor Green updated the emergency proclamation and narrowed the exception that was used to kick the Sundays out of their home. Now, landlords who wanted to move themselves or a family member in had to provide a sworn affidavit that explained exactly why they wanted to move in and also swear that they were not receiving any money from any government aid programs that were meant to house wildfire survivors. But by then, it was already too late for the Sundays. They had to pack up their belongings and give away their pets. To this day, they still haven't found a stable home.
I think the most important part that people have to understand is that by doing things like this, you displace our family. Another family is already displaced. And now we have to go out into this market and compete with other families who've lost everything. But my hope for the future, stable, affordable housing so that I can raise my kids. I don't have to worry every day.
Mr. Sunday getting emotional there, essentially as his dream, his wish for the future, stable and affordable housing where he does not have to wonder where his kids are going to sleep. Their pets are sold. Rent $8,000. I mean, these are the conditions that the people of Lahaina and Maui are living in, already living in complete, horror. As homes and businesses are destroyed, burned to the ground, from beauty and paradise to ashes and smoke. And landlords are taking advantage of this by raising the rent and going around state exceptions. The judge there saying, essentially, there's nothing that I can do. I mean, wow. This is the state of Hawaii. So if you are watching this report and thinking, oh, this is going to be a great report on the after effect of what happened in Hawaii and how things have really improved after a year, things have barely improved after a year. It is really, really essentially a stalemate. And we here at the Jeremiah Patterson Show, of course, we always like to look for light in stories as well. But this has been one of the most depressing and irritating stories that I've covered here on the show, because there are barely questions answered still a year later. But what residents are hoping and clinging onto in their hearts very, very deeply is hope and faith and joy wherever that may take them and however long it may be to get to the end of that tunnel.
I mean, for us personally, I feel like yes, there's always optimism. There's always, light at the end of the tunnel. When it's going to get there, when it's going to be there, and what that's going to look like, I don't know if I know yet. Like I said, I've stopped working full time for the time being, just to get our house back together, which is, again, sort of a luxury that I have to be able to do that. At the same time, it's very tight, very hard, very stressful, and we're building up debt doing it. So the comfort zone is going to come at a time that we know that we can get back to life as usual. I mentioned earlier, I want to be able to go through a day where I get up and I go through my daily routine and I don't think about what I have to do or why I'm doing what I'm doing, in a sense of rebuilding from what happened last year. I want to look at it as, oh cool, this is what our life is like now. This is what I get to do. I think maybe that's the turn of phrase that I want to get to is I want to get to do things. I don't want to have to do things in order to put our house back together, put our lives back together, and feel comfortable. And I want that same thing for everybody else around the island.
Now to breaking news on Maui. That's where the FBI confirms that an improvised explosive device went off last night, causing significant damage to a vehicle. It's the latest case of a homemade bomb placed around the island. Lynn Kawano has the story.
Very concerning. Sources say there were a handful of devices found Wednesday in upcountry, at least 4. Thursday night, an explosion rocked Pukalani.
Maybe they ran over a pipe bomb.
The driver of this Kia apparently ran over an explosive device Thursday night on Old Haleakala Highway. The driver's side window was blown out. The panels were pierced or dented. A witness went up to help the woman who was driving.
She was just crying, hysterically sobbing. There was a neighbor that was trying to help console her and trying to get her in contact with a family member or a friend. But the poor woman just was like shaking and crying.
The explosion could be heard on this surveillance video from a neighbor. This is the latest in a series of explosive devices placed around Maui. Thursday, the FBI sent out this picture of one of the recovered devices, saying some were made to look like small baskets.
My mom and my baby. Your mom and your baby. Okay. Did you talk to them? Where are they? I think they're Kahena Street. Kahena Street? They got out of the car. They got out of their car? Yeah, got out of the car and they headed up towards up the street. It's okay. It's okay.